This is Violence in the West Part 2, Nationalism. As an introduction, George Orwell once said that every nationalist is haunted by the belief that the past can be altered. He spends part of his time in a fantasy world, in which things happen as they should, and he will transfer fragments of this world to the history books whenever possible. You won't get a better warning about my own biases in this video, as A, there is no point in hiding it. I am a raving lunatic French nationalist, and you should be too. And B, no definitive work on nationalism stands tall and ready to dissect the history and purpose of humanity. Only a few currents and ideas, mostly in two camps, the French and the German one, ever competing in the greatest tug-of-war game humanity has ever seen. And when I say this, I mean it. When the entire world pitted its destiny in the killing fields of Verdun and on the bloody shores of Normandy, it was not only because of these notions of nationalism, but for them as well. This is our object of study, how French and German nationalism respectively create the conditions, one might even say the requirements, for various kinds of violence, transformations, and sacrifices. I warned you in the first video that I was experimenting with shifts in tone for the format of this series, and here's how it'll be. This video was originally set to be 45 minutes, and I'll cut it into 3 parts instead, because it is too hard otherwise. Sorry. About the tone, I'll try out a more casual and biased kind of writing. I'll be expecting your criticism and review from this, as well as from the rest of the video, so don't hesitate to pay extra attention to that. I believe the way I'm going about things right now has 2 advantages. If I do it right, not only do I give you a decent overview of the phenomenon, but actually help you understand the innately seductive powers of nationalism. And if you do it right, you stay within critical distance of everything I say and go cross-reference it with your own research as you should. Since I am your friend, however, I'll give you some time to get prepped for that special adversarial state of mind, and only start ranting by the second part of the series, which will either be about French or German nationalism. So you can breathe in and out. Part 1. The Nation According to Benedict Anderson. The primary writer I choose to talk about nationalism is Benedict Anderson. Others exist, but I've made a determination that they were mostly wrong or too bothersome to look up and talk about, although I do plan to talk about them in an addendum video to this one for contrast. Anderson constructs a genesis of the modern nation that is historically mostly solid, though, if I could ask for a favor, I'd ask that every historian in the comments refrained from arguing about it. We're going to take it here as a pertinent framework to conceive the role and functions of nationalism. This is not problematic at all, just as nobody who read Hobbes actually believes that men and women were living in a quote-unquote state of nature, constantly committing unspeakable acts toward each other until a large person, say the size of a mountain, came along and forced them to play nice. This is just a thought experiment that illustrates assumptions about human nature and thus their social consequences. Asking about the lack of a mountain-sized man in the fossil record actually severely hurts a rebuttal of the necessity of state violence, for example. So, this is not a cosmogony YouTube channel, okay? This being said, Anderson really is the gold standard of writers on nationalism, and here's what he had to say. For Anderson, the dawn of nationalism coincides with the dusk of religion, insofar as it applies to societies and states, which is to say, sustaining a world model of that society, describing and governing its function via these three things. First, a language which transcends the earthly and the vernacular and allows access to theological truths and the functions of administration. For example, the Bible's Latin, unifying all of Europe, or the Quran's classical Arabic, bridging the divide between Morocco and Mecca. Secondly, dynasties based on divine right to rule. And thirdly, a perception of time mixing history and cosmology in a creation myth, and a perception of space as centripetal around one society. This is to say, a perspective which places one's model as central both in history and in time, and leaves the quote-unquote other, with a big O, as something to be converted or exterminated, but never forming a fully fledged entity of their own. It has to be stated that pre-nation societies were intrinsically centripetal, oriented around the center, and hierarchic, instead of boundary-oriented and horizontal. This world model was undermined in detail respectively by what Anderson calls print capitalism, which is to say the printing press, which allowed communities to read, not in the transcendental language of the elites, but each in their own vernacular, constituting groups of shared culture and information. For Anderson, the nation was literally read into existence. Secondly, the century of the Enlightenment, which put into question the theologically ordained political order. And third, the advent of rationalism, which upended any cosmological self-centered history, or as B.A. himself put it,
the century of enlightenment, of rational secularism, brought with it its own modern darkness. With the ebbing of religious belief, the suffering which belief in part composed did not disappear. Disintegration of paradise, nothing makes fatality more arbitrary. Absurdity of salvation, nothing makes another style of continuity more necessary. What then was required was a secular transformation of fatality into continuity, contingency into meaning. As we shall see, few things are better suited to this than the idea of nation. If nation-states are widely considered to be new and historical, the nations which they give political expression always loom out of an immemorial past, and still, more important, glide into a limitless future. It is the magic of nationalism to turn chance into destiny. With Debray, we might say, yes, it is quite accidental that I am born French, but after all, France is eternal.
Thus, as the respective pillars of the old centripetal world model crumbled, the need for modern replacements appeared. This is where Anderson's definition of nation comes in. For the author, the nation is an imagined community, both limited and sovereign. Imagined, because the members of a nation will never meet or even hear of their fellow members, yet they imagine themselves in deep togetherness, and what's more, imagined as a community, in a deep horizontal comradeship despite any prevailing inequality or exploitation. No one is considered the Frenchest or the first French, there is only a fellow French. It is also imagined as limited, because it has finite, although not rigid, borders beyond which lie other nations. No nation imagines itself next to mankind, and even messianic nationalists do not dream of a global community the way religious communities used to in the past. Finally, it is imagined as sovereign because it was born in an age where enlightenment and revolution were destroying the hierarchical, divinely ordained dynastic system and replacing it. It was born at a time and place where it had to be an object that could substitute or encompass tradition and divinity, and it succeeded frighteningly well. I wish to come back to this definition to incense it further. The nation is an imagined community. It is not simply a set of people, or the links that tie them together. We must strive for a deeper level of abstraction. The heart of the nation is the act of imagination itself, or even of projection of an identity into another. It is a process that many people must do, a sort of public work which must constantly be maintained. It is the cross-section of many subjectivities. Ask 10 people what their nation is, and you will have 10 different answers. For some, a national is someone with citizenship. For others, a national is someone who is part of a culture or an ethnicity. And for some, a national is someone who loves their country or is part of a political current. As an example, a person living in Munich who might get designated by a person living in Berlin as a German might actually identify as a Bavarian first, then as a European citizen, then only as a German. Similarly, a person from Barcelona would recoil at the idea of being called a Spaniard. Listening to these disjointed voices will muddy the waters and prevent a proper understanding of the phenomenon that led generations to lay down their lives with fervor and even with increased willingness for the more educated. Use our definition as a guiding light in this. The nation doesn't exist except in the liminal space of the cross-section of subjectivities. It is what remains when everyone is accounted for in general, and no one in particular. It is an imagined community. Not by someone, not by everyone, and that's as good as it ever gets. Yet we have so much already. A confirmed unreliable narrator who provides a way of seeing yourself, and what's more, a way of seeing yourself as part of something, and a way of seeing those who are not part, the other, so to speak. And beyond this, the devil hides in the details of the framework. It is not so much a problem that so many people could contradict each other, and thus be wrong. It is an opportunity to examine in what way they are wrong, in what way they mistake others, themselves, and us. I would like to recall to us Debray's delightful citation. Yes, it is quite accidental that I am born French, but after all, France is eternal. We have quoted it in the context of the nation's replacement of religion's eternal temporality. But I will confess to you, just this once, that France is not, within the full context of history and once aware of the entirety of the facts, eternal. It's actually commonly agreed to have a beginning. If history is serious before Germany, and it will most certainly have an end if destiny is gracious after Germany. This misconception we willingly partake in the interest of the gracious feeling of living in a community, is not exclusive to time, but to geography as well. After all, what is France? Does it include or exclude its more recent regions like the Savoy and Brittany? Does it include Alsace and Lorraine? We will get to this later. Does it even include Algeria? These questions really have no meaning in our object of study. Remember that the nation is foremost imagined. No better example of this are Anderson's study of post-colonial national identities, made up seemingly from thin air. One reads, "The late President Sukarno always spoke with complete sincerity of the 350 years of colonialism that his Indonesia had endured, although the very concept of Indonesia is a 20th century invention, and most of today's Indonesia was only conquered by the Dutch between 1850 and 1910. Preeminent among contemporary Indonesia's national heroes is the early 19th century Javanese prince Diponegoro, although the prince's own memoirs show that he intended to conquer, not liberate Java, rather than expel the Dutch. Indeed, he clearly had no concept of the Dutch as a collectivity. See Harry J. Benda and John A. Larkin, is The World of Southeast Asia, page 158, and Ann Kumar's Dipo Negro, page 103. As we can plainly see, misconceptions in the understanding of our own community, of others, of our time, and of our geography are all present. The nation replaced religion as the standard source of discourse, which regulates or set the boundaries of our political lives, and nationalism replaced religiosity. This doesn't mean that we can't say it's all false anymore, on the contrary. And actually, a final tip as you prepare to put me in examination in the next part of this series. What matters a lot is the way we are wrong as a community, and what that says about us. Keep it in mind, it'll be the key to really dissecting the differences between French and German nationalist traditions. So here you go. This is the second video, which has been way too long coming. I did lose all my data at some point, and at the time of writing I still haven't recovered it. I learned how to animate, and I got some help from a great friend called Turkbud. You should really check him out in the description. I'm sure you came in here expecting a sensitive subject, and it is, but obviously it has interesting undertones and mechanics, doesn't it? Please tell me if you thought of it that way before I introduced you to Benedict Anderson, and if you have any further questions, let's dish it out in the comments. Oh, additionally, I'm making a Discord server so I can have a place to discuss and confront some of my scripts, and also keep around people interested in reading niche political science books. Nothing much more than that. If you'd like to join it, check out the link in the description, and maybe I'll meet you there. In any case, I'll see you next time, which could be in January, but also could not. Don't get your hopes up. See ya!